Вот. Да, запомни мое слово. Ну так.
Have you ever found yourself endlessly practicing a spot or a piece only to feel frustrated with lack of progress? Well, today I got something special for you. We are going to explore a game-changing approach called the principle of variability. Well, honestly, I have no idea how it's called, I have just made it up, but this approach works because it needs you to boost your creativity when you practice and allows you to attack the problem from different sides. Most of professional musicians use some of the tactics from this video, but I just decided to collect as many of them as possible in one video. To truly master a spot or a piece, mindlessly repeating it many times in a row won't cut it. This is because we are heavily multitasking when we are playing piano. So these practicing strategies allow you to break a complex task into a few simpler steps, concentrating on one goal at a time. So here are my favorite default working algorithms. For example, if we have a spot like this, which seems to be confusing for many intermediate players, we have to first play a harmonic skeleton and to understand harmonic progression. So for that, we are going to simplify this texture and playing it just beats 1 and 2, and then beats 3 and 4 separately. Gathering all of that into a chord and understanding what kind of chord we have here. So G major, then C major, then diminished, then B minor, and so on. E minor, A minor, D major, G major. Yeah, so at first you learn this simplified version chord progression by just playing all these notes simultaneously according to harmonies. And I have a detailed course on this lovely sonata explaining how to memorize it more efficiently, how to coordinate motions, and of course speaking much about Mozart's style. So if you play this piece, you might check it out. This approach is especially helpful for even more advanced pieces, because when you start a new piece and you encounter suddenly something like might think like, oh my god, is it even possible to memorize this? But as soon as you start to compress this texture and playing just essential chord progression in order to understand what is really happened here, it becomes, of course, much more learnable. And for that, you need to preserve initial hand position. So I'm not going to invert any chords. So I'm not going to play this instead of this, for example. Yeah. So I I remain within my original hand positions, playing original chords, but just playing them in a, let's say, shrinked, compressed version, like this. And just trying to memorize shapes and chords. So as you see, it doesn't seem that crazy. And after this, after you really understand the skeleton, you can already, on top of that, learn all the additional textures which you have in this spot. One of the most interesting, creative, and one of the most overseen ways to practice piano, of course, is creating a free improvisation using harmonic progression which you encounter in the score. So, for example, if you learn a piece and you encounter something interesting, you might try to improvise a little bit using this particular chord progression. Like, for example, in Chopin's Grand Polonaise, Opus 22, there is a chord progression which goes kind of towards E major. So we would expect something like that. But instead of that, we find ourselves in here. Yeah, so ending up in E flat major instead of E major. And this is a very refreshing chord progression. So in order to memorize it better and in order to understand it better, I might want to try to improvise using this particular harmonic turn by, for example, starting in, let's say, A major with a goal of ending up in A flat major using this particular harmonic progression. So let's start in A major, and then something like this. And here we go to something like this, and so if I improvise a few melodies like this using this particular harmonic progression, I of course remember it much better. Just remember that if your musical creation sounds like a cat walking piano, you might want to rethink your strategy. Playing hands separately, of course, helps a lot, but I would say that it's necessary only if you have real coordination issues. But if the spot is not challenging, of course, it's not necessary. But if you have something like polyrhythms, like in this piece, which I have analyzed in more detail in the previous video, here we have these 2 against 3, and in order to master them, you might want to practice hands separately first and then add only that note in the left hand, which creates issues actually. Like, for example, nice cup of tea, nice cup of tea, nice cup of tea, as we have done in the previous video. So then you know better where these particular problematic notes belong. Then, of course, if you have many layers in a piece, make sure that you can play principal stuff separately. So, for example, in this piece, which is a bit confusing for many learners because this middle voice is distributed between hands. So here, for example, make sure that you can play just the bass and the melody first. Because if you can't play this consistently, then how do you expect to play everything together smoothly? So we have first make sure that you remember essential stuff. Like this, and then adding the middle voice. Or, for example, playing a reduced version of the accompaniment. So you make sure that you can play something like... And you might think this is very easy, but actually check yourself and you might be surprised. Then, of course, when you have technically challenging spots which have to be articulated very clearly, like this one, make sure to learn it with a good equally accentuated touch and immediate finger release in a modest tempo. So you 100% work activating each fingertip, but just one fingertip at once, and all the other fingers should 100% rest. So something like... So you see, all my fingers, when I press a key, all the other fingers are absolutely loose, but the finger that plays is really working 100%. This is essential in order to improve your articulation and efficiency in piano playing. If a spot is technically difficult and you feel that you're struggling through it, you might want to improve motion coordination by planning consciously how exactly you move while playing piano. By, for example, in this spot... It's almost impossible to feel yourself comfortable in the right hand if you have a tense wrist and rigid arm, because this spot is really wide. So the only way to feel yourself really comfortable here is to lean on the thumb properly, playing the thumb using gravity and a gentle like pulling motion here, supporting your thumb properly, and then going in the keyboard for the rest of it. So we have these rounded motions with a good support on the thumb. Or for example, when we have like double notes here, it's very difficult to play it with just fingers, but much easier if you would consciously coordinate your motions by going in the keyboard and out, like this. Those are usually very short, very tiny motions, but they help tremendously to optimize your piano playing. And of course, in my courses, like for example, the last course on Czerny etudes from Opus 299, I explain in detail how to practice it, how to implement them into your playing. For any kind of quick passages which need to be very even, one of the most powerful strategies is learning it in dotted rhythms. However, I don't recommend it to people who have frequent issues with family members or neighbors, because it might sound strategies is learning it in dotted rhythms. However, I don't recommend it to people who have frequent issues with family members or neighbors, because it might sound like when you practice like this, it might sound a bit irritating. But essentially what is important here when you practice like that, first of all, is to apply both versions of dotted rhythms. So we distort the rhythm first in this way, long, short, long, short, long, short, long, for example, yeah? And the second time we learn it using an opposite version of dotted rhythm, like this. Then, of course, the rhythm should be very sharp and very precise. So, for example, something like this doesn't work because it's sloppy. It's not rhythmically precise. So you choose yourself taka 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 a rhythm, and then you always follow it to 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1, fighting for the evenness of that rhythm, not losing the sharpness of it. That's very, very important. And then, of course, you activate each fingertip. Just imagine that you have electricity at the tip of your fingers, activating nail joints, of course, having good stability in the knuckles, and hitting the keys with a bit more energy than you actually need, so a little bit more aggressively, kind of. So this is very anti-musical way of practicing. Sounds horrible, but it's incredibly helpful, especially if, in addition to focusing your fingers properly, you would also concentrate on an immediate release. So as soon as you reach the longer note, you free up the hand instantly. Yeah, so you hit the key and immediately free up the hand. So you learn to work properly, but also to release immediately. That's why this practicing way works so well if applied correctly. Then, of course, playing with eyes closed, and here your goal is to feel the shape of the keys and to quickly find yourself, to adjust yourself using your tactile sensation. So, for example, you play it in a slower tempo, but you move really quickly between positions in order to quickly find where exactly you have to play next, yeah, and to feel that shape with the skin of your fingers before you actually press the key. It's also very effective to learn difficult spots in shorter groups of 4 or 8 notes, but even maybe faster than you need. So if you have a spot like something like that, then you learn it and using continuity rule. So you end on a note and then you start from the same note, so you don't have to learn transitions additionally. And if something doesn't work properly, then you can fix targetedly exactly what doesn't work. Like for example, in this spot, this particular turn is very challenging, so I might want to spend more time with this particular figure, while I don't need as much time for these ones. So here, applying this way of practicing, you can better diagnose what doesn't work. Then, of course, increasing a challenge helps tremendously. And if you have something like, let's say, a shape like this, you would practice it like this. And very often, increasing the challenge and introducing larger leaps helps best to find the most ergonomic and the most comfortable motion. When we have a passage which consists of multiple hand positions, it's very helpful to fragment it and stop before each new hand position, so you better sort out your position. So you organize passage like in boxes. Here I have one hand position, here another, and then your brain learns it better. Like for example, in this passage, it might be a little bit confusing at first because we have to switch position on the go. That's why at first we would learn it like this. This is my one hand position. Then I remember that I switch toward the third finger here and start right from the new hand position. This is my second hand position. Then I make a break. Remember in this particular hand position, like this. And the last one. And you make really gaps between them because then you have time to like switch. And then all together, a bit slower and smoothly. Then, of course, mental practicing with eyes closed helps tremendously. And when you have already memorized the piece, start working mentally on it with eyes closed and just imagining in detail which fingers on which keys you use. You can start from like smaller sections, like play a couple of bars normally and then close your eyes and imagine them immediately without playing piano. This is a very helpful way of practicing, and before any public performance, when I have to play my pieces by memory without a score, I make sure that I can imagine them in detail. Then, of course, transposing your pieces to other keys is a quite challenging task for most of music learners, but it's incredibly beneficial because it helps you to not to just rely on motor memory, but activate your ear memory and also feel music better functionally. So you feel better relations between chords and you understand them better. So when you play a piece like this one, which we have already looked at, make an effort of learning it precisely in a different key, like here, for example. And then even further, like this. Of course, it will be very challenging at first, but then each new piece it will be easier and easier, and thus you will feel music functionally. So you will feel yourself much more confident when you will return to the original key. I hope this was helpful and you got some new ideas how to practice, how to manage difficult spots. Please subscribe to this channel. Of course, don't forget to check my comprehensive courses dedicated to various technique types and specific pieces from the standard piano literature. Have fun playing piano and see you next time.
The important part, no matter what it is that reminder. It is up to your intention. It is your thoughts that is fueling the quality of life. And therefore, these are always just reminders.
This is a conversation that I had at the Shaolin Temple Europe, one of my favorite conversations, where we sat down and drank tea and talked about mindfulness. And here are the 6